Movies like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer strike a chord in the hearts of many people who feel like they haven't accomplished much in life. As they see the movie, they see this character, a reindeer, who is supposedly a misfit, but by the end of the movie, he's considered a hero and everybody loves him. Kind of the typical attitude of many human beings who wish they had more or wish they could be something greater. I'd like to go ahead and read you the words of the song to see how actually pathetic it is for the human heart to want attention. You know Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen, Comet and Cupid and Donner and Blitzen, but do you recall the most famous reindeer of all? Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows. All of the other reindeer used to laugh and call him names. They never let poor Rudolph join in any reindeer games. Then one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, "Rudolph, with your nose so bright, won't you guide my sleigh tonight?" Then how the reindeer loved him as they shouted out with glee, "Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, you'll go down in history." Isn't that a sad story of the human heart? We want to be someone better so that other people will like us. And as people watch the movie, they think, well, maybe that'll happen to me someday. And that isn't the only movie. We have those like Cinderella. Many people today watch that and wish, oh, if I could only go to a fancy ball and marry a handsome prince, and then I could live happily thereafter. There's something dreamy about thinking of the grass on the other side of the fence. If only life could be better. This is an attitude that people want to be better. And I'd like for us to take this to realize it doesn't happen. It's just a fairy tale life. Now, there's nothing wrong with dreaming, but isn't it amazing how so many people accomplish their goals and they're still happy? They're still unhappy? In the newspaper just yesterday, there's an article about the absolute greatest swimmer of all time as far as Olympic medals goes. Michael Phelps has sought suicide at times because his life is so depressing. The Olympic gold medals were not enough to make him happy. This illusion that says, oh, we need to get something else out there. We need our lives to be different. We need to be greater somehow in order for life to be real. Well, I'd like to take this and go in a little bit different direction as well to show that, well, let's just use the illustration of animals and the fact that they are very territorial. Thinking of dogs, you know what happens when you're playing with your dog, say in the front yard, and your dog sees another dog 3 or 4 blocks away. Your dog starts barking as to say, "Get away from here. This is my territory." Well, not just the dogs are territorial. How about fire ants? Have you ever kicked over one of their hills? If you go down south, the hills are like this big, and you kick them over, it's amazing. You see that there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of ants that come out for one reason: kill. Their own mentality is just to kill, to destroy you because you knocked over to their place. They're very territorial. And not only those, but you have the phrase stirring up a hornet's nest, sticking your head into a hornet's nest. It's like the hornets love their little confinement there. But once you stick your head into it, it's attack mode for them. Another one would be the buffaloes. When I went out west and traveled from Dallas-Fort Worth all the way up to Seattle, Washington, We stopped at Yellowstone and we had these signs that were standing that said, "Stay away from the buffalo." And we're thinking, okay, whatever that means. And then when we watch TV that night, we find out the latest announcement. Yet another person failed to follow our signs. The 69th person of the year has died from buffaloes. Because they look so attractive and so innocent, people will take a picture like 200 yards away. And they think, well, I can take a few steps forward and nothing happens to the buffalo. And they keep getting closer and closer until you finally break this invisible barrier. Probably a different distance for each buffalo. But once you break it, it becomes anger mode for it, and it chases after you to kill you. You're in its space. You know, we understand that with animals, but we often forget it in the spiritual world. Satan has his domain. Believe it or not. God had total control and local authority over planet Earth when life was perfect. Adam and Eve were perfect. But when Adam and Eve sinned, they gave the authority of the world to Satan. Satan now, to some extent, has much authority over planet Earth. That's why he's called the Prince of the world. That's why when Jesus was tempted, the Satan came up to him and said, "I'll give you all of the kingdoms if you'll only bow down to me." Because the kingdom is his. Now, if you can understand all of that and understand this animal behavior of being territorial, and I might add there's another perspective we could have mentioned, jealousy. You know what it's like to go up to a dog who already has a bone in his mouth? I've heard about that for years, but it wasn't until I was a kid and my own pet dog had a bone in his mouth, and I reached to grab it. This evil look came across the dog's face and started growling. Not a friendly growl, like I was trying to pull the bone out of its mouth. There's this jealousy there that some people have something and they don't want to give it up. Another good picture for that would be crabs. I've probably mentioned that one before as well. That you could put in the middle of your dinner table this shallow pan with crabs in there, full of crabs. You don't even have to put a lid on top of the pan because the crabs will never get out. If there was only one inside of there, it would get out. But crabs are so jealous that when they see another crab trying to get out, it reaches up and pulls them back down. This selfish mentality. I don't want you to be successful. I'm going to pull you down if I can't be successful. Now, let's look at our passage today in Matthew chapter 2. Who is in somewhat control of the world? It's Satan. And now we have the God of the universe, infinitely in control of everything, coming in to invade Satan's world. You think Satan's going to welcome them with a party? We're talking Satan's prime enemy from his perspective is God. And God has sent his son, Jesus, into the world. We're talking a major war. We're talking worse than fire ants, worse than buffaloes, worse than hornets. We're talking an angry, angry devil who is really hostile. He's jealous. He's just furious that the Son of God would come into his territory. Now we've overemphasized this so that we can get more out of the passage. I know we've already read the passage, but you probably thought, yeah, I'm familiar with it. But when we see more of the background, the spiritual warfare going on in the air, it really makes more sense. But what I want us to get, one of the minor points of the message is, when you live a righteous life, and you start invading in Satan's territory, he's not going to put up with it. He's not going to let you do it as much as he's able to. He will fight back. He will kick, scratch, sting, whatever he can do to keep you from being successful and taking away his possessions. That's what we find in this passage, Matthew chapter 2. So let's look at this first part where Satan attacks to kill Jesus. I mean, he wants to kill Jesus. It's not like he's saying you need to get out of here. He wants to kill him. Let's look now at verses 13 to 15, where Herod searches for the child to destroy him. Now when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him. So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night and left for Egypt. He remained there until the death of Herod. Satan moved Herod to kill Jesus. Satan did not want Jesus on planet Earth. And he moves through the heart of Herod to do the killing. Let's go to the next part. In verses 16 through 18, Herod slaughters babies. Then when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi. Then what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more. Who was this Herod guy? Well, most Christians know only this story in the Bible, where he slaughtered babies. Now, I'm not going to say the death of a few is okay, but it's not as bad as what we think, like he slaughtered millions. It's probably just in the area of Bethlehem. Some people think there may have been something like 300 to 400 people in that city. So maybe in that vicinity there weren't as many baby boys as we might think as far as slaughtering hundreds or thousands. But still, the death of these babies, totally innocent, because Satan's out to find Jesus to kill him. Herod was a wacko. It was mentioned in our Sunday school class today that he had many similarities to Stalin. Did you know that Herod actually killed 2 of his sons whom he heard might be plotting against his life? So he didn't want to even check it out and see if it was true. He just immediately slaughtered 2 of his sons. If I'm not mistaken, he killed his favorite wife, Marianne. Afterwards, he regretted it. Oh, she was my favorite one. Why did I kill her? He was such a lunatic that just before he was to die, something happened. Word got out that he did die. Maybe he recovered. Maybe it was just an early announcement. But when the Jews heard that Herod had died, there was rejoicing in the city. Herod found out about it. He wanted to make sure when he died, people mourned. So he had some of his soldiers go into the city and grab something like 1,000 people and gave the announcement that as soon as I die, you kill these people so that at least somebody in the country will be crying when I die. This is the lunatic. Satan found a wonderful lunatic to fulfill Satan's desires. And it didn't end with him. Let's continue to the next section, verses 19 to 23. Archelaus was going to be used to kill Jesus. So let's read it. Verse 19 says, "But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, and said, Get up, take the child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel. For those who sought the child's life are dead. So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Then after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the regions of Galilee, and came and lived in a city called Nazareth." So who was Archelaus? Well, he was the son of Herod. When the wacko Herod the Great died, his last will and testament was read before Caesar Augustus. Who would take over this territory? So they opened up the scroll and read it. And he said, "I want my son Archelaus to be in control of the southern territory, my other son Antipas to have the middle area, and Philip to have the northern area." All three of the sons contested the will. They said, "No, my dad was a little insane. He really meant to give it all to me." So all three are fighting for total control over the land we would call Palestine or Israel. And after all the squabbling was going on, some people from Israel showed up, from the land we will call Judea. And they said, please don't have Archelaus be our new leader. Please don't do that. And Archelaus is hearing this, and he's shocked. And he's just like his dad. So as soon as Archelaus has been declared by Caesar Augustus to be the ruler of the southern territory, guess what Archelaus does when he goes back home? He has some of his soldiers go in and slaughters thousands of people, mercilessly, just slaughtering people. How dare you try to keep me from being the king? This is the Archelaus that Joseph and Mary are hearing of. Oh, he's in charge of the southern area. We're going to take a trip up north. We're going to Nazareth. It says in the passage that God knew that Satan would move through Archelaus to try to kill Jesus. So the point I want you to see is the more you live like Jesus Christ, I want you to be aware difficulties will come. Nothing to be alarmed about, but we need to be aware of them. They will take place. A few weeks ago in our counseling class that I've been teaching over Zoom, I have told them repeatedly, make sure you always pray at the beginning for God to be in control, that truth would take place, and that there would be no distractions. The first guy didn't do it. He completely forgot that part of, God, please remove distractions. All of a sudden, the person who's trying to get help emotionally, the phone is ringing, and then someone's walking into the room, and other distractions are like non-stop. It should not surprise us when we live for the Lord, that Satan will come in to distract somehow, some way. Again, we're not to be alarmed by that. We're just supposed to be aware of it and take necessary steps to avoid it as much as possible. So let's move to the next section here. God is sovereign, and he does direct you if you allow him to. I mean, he directed the Magi using a star. When we read that in verse 2, the Magi asked Herod, or whether Herod asked him, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." Verse 9, after hearing the king, they went their way, and the star which they had seen in the east went on before them, until it came and stood over the place where the child was. Okay, now think about this big picture. God is sending his Son into the world to redeem the world. Satan knows that, and he's out to kill Jesus. It's not facing God one bit. He's infinitely in control of everything. So he's having fun, if I may say those words, having a star to direct people to bypass all of Satan's attacks. I mean, even goes right into the heart of Jerusalem, as if to say, hey, look at this, I know you're trying to kill him, so hey, here's your chance. But God works around it and has them go away. God is sovereign, and he enjoys mocking the evil one who tries to put you and me down when we live for him. God directed the Magi using a star. Now let's go to another way God is in control. He directed the Magi using a dream. Verse 12. And having been warned by God in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi left for their own country by another way. So God speaks sometimes through a star, sometimes he speaks through a dream. There's no one way God speaks. The real deal is, do you know his voice when he does speak? God says, my sheep hear my voice. Let's look at one more time God directed his people to avoid Satan's attack. In verses 19 to 23, we see that God directed Joseph using dreams. For it says, verse 19, when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel. For those who sought the child's life are dead. So Joseph got up and took the child. Go to verse 22. For when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in the place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Notice what happens next. Then, after being warned by God in a dream, he left. We have no need to worry about Satan's attacks. God will direct us. And if he has you go face to face with Herod in downtown Jerusalem, that's God's choice. God doesn't promise our lives to be comfortable. God tells us our joy and peace is in obeying him, not chasing after the life of Cinderella, not chasing after the life of Rudolph. It's simply obeying the Lord and doing whatever he says. Our life is fulfilled. We should expect harassment from the devil, but we should know also that God is sovereign and he will lead us along our paths. God is sovereign. Let's look at another one. That God is still sovereign and speaks to you as well. In the same way that God spoke to the Magi and to Joseph, God wants to speak to you. There were more things that I would like for you to add to your outline, to your insert. But I guess I need to move quickly to the fact that this is really relevant for us. The more you become like Christ, the more you try to live for the Lord, the more you try to witness to people, the more you try to encourage people to do what's right, the more you will be attacked. I'm not saying we should fear. I'm just saying just do whatever the Lord says. And don't be surprised when it comes. It happens all the time. People, Christians, being attacked. Before I came here to Ohio, I left a church in the previous city. The pastor had been there for 25 years. And all of a sudden, about 1 or 2 years after I left, the leadership decided they did not want their church to be a part of the denomination anymore. It was straying too far away from the Bible. So I was encouraged. Hey, this is exciting. They want to stand up for truth. But you stand up for truth, you better be ready for an attack. To my total surprise, I heard and saw that the very next day, on the front of the city's newspaper, front page, the head column, local pastor cheats on wife and does dilly-dallying, whatever the wording was. And they mentioned this, and I'm thinking, wow, I didn't know any of this about the pastor. And I read the entire article, turned to the next page, where they put the rest of the article. Read the entire thing, and at the very bottom of the article, this was the very last sentence. This episode took place 25 years ago. Front page news. Why? Because the people who were part of the denomination saw that these Christians were leaving, and they're going to get even, and they're going to destroy his reputation as much as possible. It is sad to think that Christians at times are no different from the world. Let's take another guy who's been very popular. His name is Rick Warren. He has probably been through more garbage than all the rest of us combined. I am not joking. If I were to tell it to you, you would cringe at the horror that he has been through. But he does something as simple as try to reach out to his church, try to grow the church. He writes this book. He takes a sabbatical. He entitles the book, The Purpose-Driven Life. Millions of copies are sold. And as soon as that happens, Christians attack him. Preachers around the country are saying, oh, this is of the devil because he used too many translations. And the illustrations go on, and they attack him. Why? Because, unfortunately, even Christians have a very crabby attitude. You're becoming more successful than me. We'll pull you down. We don't want you more successful because we want to be more successful. I was with a young couple at this church 12, 13 years ago. We went out to eat at a diner over here across the street from a very large church. And it was difficult to talk to them because the woman kept putting down the people at the church. They're just a bunch of snobs. They're just a bunch, and if I had only not thought about it, I should have asked the question, oh, can you name one person at the church? Well, they didn't know anybody. They were just putting down someone else who was supposedly wealthier. And it sounded like another crabby attitude. I wish I had their money. And I'm so angry they have it, I wish I could take it from them. It's terrible in communities when churches will have one church to start growing rapidly, and the others will say, well, it's because they're liberal. It's because they do this. They use the wrong translation. It's because they've let this evil stuff get in the church. The negativity, they're pulling down. So why am I saying all that? Not to expose that, but to say that when you live for Jesus Christ, just expect it. It happens. And just move on. Jesus came into his own, and his own received him not. They put him on the cross. His own apostles turned against him. So I'd like for us to take everything from this, the Christmas season, the New Year, everything and lump it up into this perspective. I'd like for us to add these two additional applications, and that is, don't be surprised when attacks do take place. A friend of mine named Erwin McManus, a classmate of mine who's now pastoring a church in Los Angeles, wrote in his book, The Barbarian Way, these words. When we are born again, we are dropped not into a maternity ward, but into a war zone. Our birthplace is less mother's womb and more battlefield earth. McManus says when a person enters the kingdom of God, they don't find safe zones or waiting rooms. There isn't even a boot camp. He writes, it's on the job, on the field training. You get to take your first steps at the new life in the middle of the battlefield. The scriptures are quite clear about this. We want the Cinderella story. We want the Rudolph story. It isn't real. You live for Jesus Christ, people will hate you. And yes, sometimes even other Christians. God wants us to realize, oh, yeah, I was forewarned that would happen. Just be aware of it. There's nothing you can do. God gives people free will. That's their choice. The second part I want is know that God is allowing it for good. There is a positive reason behind everything God allows. God is sovereign. And it's amazing how some of the worst critics are used by God to fine-tune our ministry. I know that several months ago that I was getting ready to teach a class on counseling. I put together all my work. I was so excited. I put in a lot of extra overtime, staying up later, getting up earlier, doing all this to get it ready. When I presented it to some leaders, they said, we're not going to accept this. Your students will not get credit. And I'm kind of like thrown back. And I became almost obsessed with trying to make sure I proved them wrong. And what I'm doing, I realized I wouldn't be so entrenched in all of this if I hadn't have been attacked. They said my presentation is too biblical. That wasn't the reason why they couldn't accept it. And that motivated me. When other people put you down, would you first realize, okay, I was to expect all this, no surprise. Even if your name is on the front page of the newspaper, even if it's slanderous, even if it's lies, do you really expect Satan to say anything other than lies? He never speaks the truth, except to twist it a little bit. So when difficulties come your way, let's say even in this next year, let's say even Cornersburg Baptist Church starts to grow, we need to help other people along the way and help them realize you live for the Lord, you will be attacked. But let's accept it as God's way of building character in us and helping His church to grow. And let's just stay positive and keep going and trust in the Lord to accomplish His will. It's easy for us to look at this Christmas story passage in Matthew 2 and say, boy, there's sure a bunch of bad things taking place. But it's a lot different when we realize that's real stuff. And it happens to us as well. Would you bow your heads for prayer?